Hey, this is Jen, the Holistic Health Boss, your functional health practitioner and expert. And I want to talk to you guys this week about something that you might have, and you don't have to have diabetes to have it, but it's most commonly associated with diabetes. And I'm talking about insulin resistance. Two words, like I said, that are most commonly associated with diabetes or obesity, but you actually don't have to have either one of those in order to be insulin resistant. In fact, I see this all the time with the average everyday person who's working out and eating quote unquote healthy. Some of the signature signs of insulin resistance can include, challenges with energy balance. So having really, noticeable highs and lows in your energy, constant and uncontrollable cravings for sugar and carbohydrates, difficulty losing weight or maintaining any type of weight loss, and various hormone imbalances, especially with cortisol, thyroid, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. So let's talk about what exactly is insulin resistance, since it is so common amongst the everyday person, but most people don't know about it. So insulin's primary responsibility in the body is to move glucose or sugar that we've received from food into the cells for energy, okay? So when glucose levels remain high, but insulin levels remain the same, that's qualified as insulin resistance. So the cells are literally, they've stopped answering the knock at the door, and they're no longer letting glucose in, and so therefore the insulin remains the same, but glucose levels remain higher in the bloodstream. So how does insulin resistance happen then with maybe the average everyday person? Well, when you eat, insulin levels increase, and this signals the liver to then convert glucose into glycogen and to store it as energy later. And then during times when you're not eating, insulin levels are low, and this then signals the liver, you still need energy during these times. So this signals the liver to convert glycogen back into glucose, for energy. So let's say, for example, when you're sleeping or when you're between meals and you still need energy for the rest of all the functions of your body to still keep functioning. You need that energy. So your body will then, when you're not eating, it converts that glycogen into glucose through the liver again. So this is a really brilliant mechanism that the body has essentially developed over, thousands of years for efficient energy use. However, when the body is bombarded by glucose, this brilliant mechanism begins to fail. So the cells become oversaturated with glucose, and they stop answering the knock at the door, leaving insulin levels the same, but glucose in the bloodstream remaining high. So logically then, anyone that's consuming carbohydrates in a way that's not right for their body runs the risk of falling into the insulin resistance trap. Now, another factor in this is that stress can also play a major factor when it comes to blood sugar levels. So most people, associate the hormone cortisol with our stress. Well, what you may not know is that cortisol also helps to regulate blood sugar in the body. So therefore, whenever we have elevated stress and then elevated cortisol, this can also negatively impact how the body is able to manage blood glucose levels and insulin at the same time. So elevated levels of blood sugar over an extended period of time can eventually lead to diabetes, but insulin resistance occurs long before a diagnosis is ever given. So poorly managed blood sugar, even with those who aren't high risk for diabetes, can lead to chronic fatigue and inflammation, weight gain, sugar or carb cravings, and other chronic conditions. Now, some of the risk factors that can contribute to insulin resistance are simple things that I see a lot of people doing. These could be things like, eating constantly or snacking throughout the day, like that old paradigm of eating 6 meals a day. You're constantly eating, so you're constantly challenging the body with managing blood glucose levels. Also, hormone imbalances, specifically ones that affect metabolism, so in the thyroid and the cortisol levels, and then also loading up on carbs, even the quote-unquote healthy ones. Chronic, unrelenting mental emotional stress, so stress that you just have in your day-to-day life because of relationships or because of work. Inadequate amounts of fat and protein in the diet. Also, genetics, like how your body metabolizes carbs and fats and proteins, as well as lack of exercise or inappropriate exercise for your body type, and then also a low fiber intake in the diet. So carbs are essentially cheap, easy, and convenient. We have come to live in this carb-centric world out of convenience and our constant desire to do less yet accomplish more at the same time. Our ancestors never had as many carbs readily available to them as we do now. They had to forage the forest and expend a lot of energy to collect fruits and vegetables and even the grains that they were eating at that time. Now you walk into any store that sells food and you're going to see hundreds of carb-loaded products that are lining the shelves absolutely everywhere. So this overabundance of carbs, and even the healthy ones, has paved the way for more prevalent insulin resistance. So maybe you eat less carbs now, or you eat healthier carbs now, but what we have to realize that in some cases with insulin resistance, we're working against years or even decades of carb loading from where we might have come from, and it takes the body some time to adjust back and get back to normal. So how can you tell? You might be wondering that if you have insulin resistance. Well, here's some of the things that you want to look for. If you have any types of, if you're struggling with like energy dips, especially in the afternoon time, like I mentioned before, if your weight has been climbing or if you're struggling losing weight even when you're cutting calories, any type of hormone imbalance can be interrelated and correlated with insulin resistance, insomnia or any kind of trouble sleeping, brain fog, or poor memory in general, and then water retention, inflammation, and high cholesterol. Now, these are just some of the signature signs and symptoms of insulin resistance. The list goes on. And I always like to say, test, not guess. So if you're experiencing any of these things, or maybe anything else that you haven't received an answer for, then you're better off testing to see if insulin resistance might be at play for you. So there's a couple of ways that you can go about testing this, and two of my favorite and preferred ways is what I'm going to share with you. So the first one is that you can do a dried urine comprehensive hormone test, or known as Dutch, where we can get some insights looking at your hormones based upon that'll show us some insights and correlating factors with insulin resistance. Now, you can get this Dutch test from a functional health practitioner like myself, which would also help maybe to solve any hormone imbalance issues that you might be struggling with, as well, as they are interconnected. Now, the other way to maybe test for your insulin resistance is by getting a home glucosemometer or glucometer. You can get these off of Amazon for fairly cheap, and then you can start to track whatever your fasting glucose level is in the morning time, and then how your body is responding to food after you consume it. Now, if you choose to go the route of getting a home glucometer and testing this out yourself, there's a couple of insights that I want to share with you. One is that the functional standards for insulin levels or glucose levels is much different than the conventional standards that you're going to read about on the internet. So in my practice, I like to see fasting glucose levels somewhere in the 70s or 80s, and I think that you would find this common amongst most other health practitioners, functional health practitioners as well. And then after you eat food, when you're measuring how your body responds to food, I like to see maybe a 10-point variance on average. Anything that's going to be spiking really high, like 20 points difference from before you ate to after you ate, would be an indication that, that maybe too many carbs are in that food for you. So those are the two best ways that I find to kind of monitor your body's reactions and see how it's triggering some, internal mechanisms in your body and showing signs for insulin resistance. Now, regardless of whether or not you do some testing, I also wanted to give you guys some kind of rules to live by in order to prevent insulin resistance or to reverse it if you think that you have it. So the first one is, it's okay not to eat. If you're not hungry, you don't want to force yourself to eat. Like I mentioned earlier, constantly snacking or eating frequently throughout the day, again, that old paradigm of eating 6 meals throughout the day to lose weight is actually probably one of the things that's made insulin resistance most prevalent, because we're constantly bombarding the body with having to turn over food into glucose all the time. So even periods of intermittent fasting, usually done overnight, can be helpful in reversing insulin resistance or preventing insulin resistance. So this would look like, basically you eat your last meal at dinner time and then you wait to eat until 12 hours later. Now, my only caution with this is that you do want to be careful with any type of intermittent fasting if you have underlying hormone imbalances. So you definitely want to do that under the direction of a functional health practitioner that you might be working with. So the main focus is to eat 3 adequate meals a day that have plenty of fat and protein in them and maybe a smaller portion of carbs, and that's going to help you to feel full and satiated and also balance your blood sugar levels. Now, number 2 is that gluten-free isn't a license to eat unlimited gluten-free carbs. I see this all the time when people go gluten-free. They start to load up on all these gluten-free carbs like rice and quinoa and starchy potatoes, and these are the healthier types of carbs, definitely, but even these can pose a problem, especially if your body it doesn't metabolize carbohydrates very well, or you might be more susceptible genetically to insulin resistance based on family history or other factors. So when you're going gluten-free, that can definitely help to reverse or prevent insulin resistance by removing some of those inflammatory foods, but you want to be careful about how many gluten-free carbs you're loading up on. And again, maybe shift your focus more towards fats and proteins to help balance that metabolic scale. Now, this kind of leads me into the third point, is that high protein or high fat doesn't necessarily mean high protein. So as you start to maybe reduce your consumption of carbs, you're likely going to lean towards a higher fat and high protein diet. And I see people tip the scale too far sometimes and eat way too much protein and not enough fat. So even proteins can be converted easily into glucose or can contribute to insulin resistance if it's already occurring. So you want to really focus on, a better adequate intake of healthy types of fats like olive oil, avocados, and coconut oil. And then when you are choosing your proteins, I tend to, lean towards the fattier types of proteins. So this is going to be things like bacon and pork butt and pork shoulder or dark meat chicken over lighter, leaner meats. So when you're eating more fat, it's going to help to keep you satiated. It's going to give you the nutrients that you need. You're going to get your proteins in automatically that way as well. And then you're not going to feel hungry in between meals and be doing that snacking that we talked about earlier. Now, the fourth point that I want to share with you, and the last one in regards to this, is that also you want to be alternating your high intensity training with what I call some resting endurance training. So studies have shown that both high intensity interval training, or known as HIIT training, as well as low intensity endurance training both have positive impacts on reversing or preventing insulin resistance. So if you think about it, this is the way that our ancestors actually used to move. They would go through more intense periods of exercise, let's say while they were hunting or while they were being hunted themselves and having to run away from something. And then they also had periods of longer duration, long and slow type of activity, let's say when they were migrating. So in your workout routine, you want to incorporate maybe a couple of days of high intensity interval training at the gym as usual, and then incorporate also a couple of days of long, slow activity such as walking. And if you really want to optimize the days that you're doing your longer, slow activity, then you can have that follow a period of the intermittent fasting. So you intermittent fast overnight, and then in the morning time you'll go for a long, low intensity walk, which would help you to regulate those blood sugar levels and extract some of that energy, glycogen, into glucose and help the liver conversion there. So if you guys are, suspecting that you have insulin resistance, just know that reversing insulin resistance can take some time. It can, it takes weeks or even months depending on how insulin resistant your body has come. But know that once you start making changes to your diet and your exercise routine and even managing stress better in your life, that you will see some results. You should start to notice your energy be more balanced, improvements in your sleep, and even experience some weight gain. And if you think that, insulin resistance is hanging you up from getting to where it is you want to be, then I invite you to explore your body's needs with me and to schedule a complimentary Ideal Health and Weight Discovery session by clicking on the link below or going back to the email where you found this video. Now, I hope this was really helpful for you guys today. Share this with your friends and family as well too, because like I said, insulin resistance is becoming so prevalent, and it actually happens long before the diagnosis of diabetes would be received. So have a great week, and I'll see you next week on the blog.